Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Yes, we're about to get started. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Happy All Saints Sunday to you. It's great to have you here with us today. I say this every time our speaker comes to us. It gets more true every time I say it. She needs no introduction. This great friend of St. Paul's, Barbara, it's wonderful to have you. Michael, it's great to have you back with us. Great to have so many pilgrims here with us today. You're in for a treat, a little virtual tour, and I don't want to waste a moment. The floor is yours, madam. Please welcome Barbara Vane.
I have to finish.
20 till.
20 till?
15 till.
Okay.
Take all the time you want.
Good morning. Your rector asked me to do a kind of romp review for those of us who were on pilgrimage to France in May. And it's really a kind of test prep because the final exam will be administered here at St. Paul's in May. Now, some of you will be in England in May at the time that the test is being administered. It's a 3-hour test. At the time that the test will be administered, some of you will be in England. And I've spoken to the King, and those who are going to England will be excused from taking the test, but will be obliged to go to the champagne tea at Highgrove. So I leave that in your hands, how you want to handle that. Okay. It was really fun for me to think back about what we've seen. And I can't show you everything because there are some certain hard rules about how many slides you have based on the length of your talk, and I know I have too many. But that said, I wanted to kind of focus on some things that I hope that we drew from our trip and that are important reminders for me. So I have to say that I started working on this a while ago and I had already put this up on the screen, and then I thought, what was that? Why did I have that there? So, but it will become clear, but I hope you know right away why, because of the image of St. Paul. I have to say that one of our early days was a little bit disorienting for me because I hadn't been there before, right, which is the Abbey of Le Bec et Loin. This was at Barney Hawkins' suggestion, and so I was a little bit like a fish out of water, notwithstanding the pond in the front there. This had been a very important monastery through the Middle Ages. Le Bec, the name comes, as you may remember, from an old French word for stream, and Éloin was the founding father of this community. It was, as a group, our first experience, and also our first experience of the physical disruption, to put it politely, to cultural heritage that happens because of war and revolution, right? So that what you see today is a pale image of, oops, wrong way, what had gone before. So on the left-hand side, you see that community before the French Revolution, and on the right, an aerial view of what it looks like today. The church was already heavily damaged in 1418 as a result of the 100 Years' War. And most of what survives today are the conventual buildings, plus the one tower. Remember passing through that tower. So now why was it so consequential in Barney's mind? And that was that there were 3 abbots of Le Bec who went on to become Archbishop of Canterbury. The first one is the one you see on the left in that line drawing. That's a letter L, and his name was L'Enfant. So that's actually the beginning of the text of his own text, which was a defense of transubstantiation that he wrote. He also wrote a commentary on the epistles of St. Paul. He was originally from Pavia, so an Italian who ultimately ended up being Archbishop of Canterbury. For those Italians in the group who are now Episcopalians, that you have a good medieval heritage. And he was responsible for deposing the guy at the right-hand side, his Anglo-Saxon predecessor, who has the less than memorable name of Stigand. The transitions between one Archbishop of Canterbury and another don't always go smoothly, as this example from the early 11th century, late 11th century demonstrates, right? The second Archbishop that Barney had in mind is Anselm of Aosta, also an Italian. Here you see him in a manuscript in Oxford at the beginning of his text of meditations that he wrote. And the third was Theobald, and I apologize for the image stolen from Alamy, who was Thomas Becket's predecessor. So taken together, this would very much impressed on anybody from the Anglican tradition the importance of Lebec. And Barney then told this story about having been there one time with the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, who, upon getting out of the bus or car, whatever they were in, fell to his knees and kissed the ground. And I was kind of confused by that story, because what I knew about Lebec was its later history, when it was from the Napoleonic era through the Second World War. It was a place for training of horses. So I hesitated to think what we might really say about the ground underneath our feet. And there you see an image of Lebec during this time. You notice that there are horses and men. There are no women. Horses and men. Why? Because this was a training ground for horses who were going to be used in war, right? So a not very nice aspect of it, but an important aspect, right? And I knew that part, but only in preparing for this talk did I find this image of the stables where the horses stayed. You see the straw and the kind of manger troughs, and then the kind of, what's underfoot seems a little bit iffy, and that was particularly troubling, because you may or may not recognize that is the space that is today the church at Lebec, right? So it had been, and the good news is they've cleaned it up, right? So that is the former refectory of the monastery, but then was the stable for the horses for a long time. So be careful where you decide to drop to the ground and kiss. Off to the side in that very room, do you remember this extraordinary image of one of the abbots of Lebec from the 14th century with these wrinkles shown and crow's feet? This is very atypical. If you think about most any obituary that you read in the New York Times, you see the picture and you think, oh no, that person, they died when they were 25. And then you realize that they were 110, but they used a picture from when they were younger. You don't generally tend to have yourself immortalized looking quite the way this guy looks with his wrinkles across his forehead, but that's what he chose. And maybe that caused someone to take a little bit of pity on him, because you notice that there's a modern pillow underneath his head. Do you remember seeing that and thinking, well, that was a funny thing? But somebody that thought, well, we need to look after this guy for eternity. He had become eventually Bishop of Évreux in Normandy, but he came home to Bec to be buried. Speaking of furrowed brows, however, this image of, this is either Ambrose of Milan or Augustine of Hippo. They had the four fathers of the church, and clearly one of the fathers of the church, one of the bishops, decided to have a little conversation with Oren. I'm not quite sure what he had done, but there was very serious discussion going on. In the same room, there was a more benign figure, which I hope you may have noticed, a 14th century Virgin and Child, and she has some unfortunate makeup that's been done on her face. But if you notice how really the beautiful elegance of her hand, and then a playful element, can you see that the baby's foot is sticking, that kind of starting to stick out from underneath her mantle there. So that was a very special thing to see there. The town itself was extraordinarily beautiful. And obviously prospering. It was a perfect day. And then we went on, as very abstemious pilgrims, we went on for our usual water and day-old bread at the end of the day. And yeah, right? I mean, some of us decided to walk to Mont Saint-Michel at low tide, and that was a captivating experience. And I think really impressed on us the real sense of pilgrimage, and also of history, that this place has endured as it has. And I think you can guess which among us could have taken a photograph as fine as this one. It was, it's our guy. I love it because that cloud formation gives us a sense, but as only Dennis can do, of the angelic presence hovering just above Mont Saint-Michel, which is so caught up in French history, right? There's the Order of Saint-Michel, which is one of the French honorary orders, and from the time of William the Conqueror, right? Because the Mont Saint-Michel even appears in the Bayeux Tapestry. So at Mont Saint-Michel, you had the awareness, of course, of this history dating back to the time of the tapestry itself, but also more recent times. And for those who didn't want to or weren't able to walk all the way up to the church, there was a different kind of sacred experience at this Mère Poulard's restaurant. Now, I say that facetiously, but not entirely, because we know that the Mère Poulard's restaurant is where Ernest Hemingway led the other first journalists who were covering the D-Day invasions, right? Led them up as soon as possible after the 6th of June to stay, and that became their central place of operations for a while. So it has a very special aspect in that regard. The other thing that's special about it is who was Mère Poulard. Almost nobody knows this. She was a maid in the household of a man called Coroyer, who was the man charged with the restoration of Mont Saint-Michel in the 19th century. And so an architectural restorer in the era of Viollet-le-Duc, and she wasn't Madame Poulard when she arrived. She was a member of his household, and then she met Monsieur Poulard, whose family ran a local bakery, and then they turned it into this great and thriving business, which it is today. If you're missing the omelets, right, their signature omelets, you can still get the cookies, the galette, even from Amazon. So this was a very special experience too, and really a reminder of this toggling that I found myself always doing, toggling between the medieval world that's often in my head, right? The centuries that went before us, and where we are today, and that this kind of sacred bond. I think it's nothing less than that. Then on to the Cathedral of Notre-Dame at Bayeux, and discussion like not all Notre-Dame cathedrals are in Paris, right? And this was very useful because I think we used your scarf to discuss the difference between tapestry and embroidery as we walked up to this cathedral. But I was so thrilled by this group because I decided that we should read the tympanum, and this with its representation of Thomas Becket, which you guys figured out. That was really exciting to see and to remember that there's some kind of minimal damage from, it's sort of pockmarked from a little bit of damage from the war, but in general, the Bayeux had really survived without much damage at all. Inside, this remarkable, sturdy Norman interior that is then on top of it is this beautiful Gothic lace, and then this flights of fantasy of the Baroque with this pulpit that if you didn't a very emphatic notion that when the priest is speaking from the pulpit, the Holy Spirit is present, right? Because we've got all of this rays of sunshine, cloud formations, and so on. It was quite extraordinary. Also, too, this notion that there's a link here between Norman architecture in Normandy and in England. So those who will be skipping the exam and going to Durham will again have a very strong sense of that connection between France and England. Then we went down to the Norman crypt, and this is where I made a crucial error. I had somehow neglected to notice that there was no stair rail, and I was terribly worried that on the way down or the way back up that we were going to lose part of our group on these sort of dark and slippery stairs, but we didn't. And we saw the wonderful wall paintings there with these musical angels that had been enhanced during restoration. Can you see? Is it not so well? I'm sorry. It's a little too light. But I want you to hold on to the images of those angels playing musical instruments, in particular that several of them are playing horns. Just keep that in mind. And also in the crypt, extraordinary wall painting around a tomb. Just a very powerful, as crypts often are, because so much can be preserved from later mischief, really, on the part of people in churches in later periods. There was a very sobering reminder about the more recent history in this side chapel that had pictures of those from the church who had been killed by the Nazis during the occupation, and they were members of the resistance, right? So photographs of nuns and priests, and a real connection between past and present in a church that has been there for centuries. One of the really remarkable things to me about the Bayeux Tapestry is this scene. Remember that this tapestry, which we remember is really an embroidery, celebrates the Norman conquest. It celebrates William's invasion and overtake of England. It is remarkable that in such a celebration of what was accomplished through war, that the artist would choose to show us this, the displacement and the impact on innocent people that is provoked in such a conflict, right? That is a very unusual thing to see in this kind of celebration of war. And I want to read to you a very brief description that is written by a man called Baudry of Bourgueil, not a household name, 12th century, writes about an imagined room in which there is an extraordinary tapestry. And in his imaginings, he talks about, on one wall there are scenes of the Old Testament, on another wall there are scenes of Greek and Roman heroes, and on another wall he describes a tapestry that has to mean that he either saw the Bayeux Tapestry or knew about the Bayeux Tapestry, because he describes so much of what's going on in the tapestry, and including the particular scene that I find so affecting. So listen just to what he said. All the houses in the town resound with lamenting, not a place, not a house that is not filled with tears. No one is without tears, no youth, no man, no woman. What can the people do? White with fear, they imagine walls breached, houses burned, all the inhabitants killed. William's wealth, his glory, his wars and his battles, his triumphs could be read one by one in this tapestry frieze. Truly, I would have believed the figures real and living had not the pictures lacked language and senses and flesh. Each of the objects and figures was designated by letters. Remember how there are inscriptions telling you what's going on. Literate viewers could read them as they observed. All this was shown on that marvelous hanging. I in particular found this presentation and this moment in the tapestry so resonant this summer when our news was full of images of women and children in Gaza. To see that notion of the suffering of innocence picked up in a tapestry from so long ago, from the 11th century, was a profoundly moving thing. It also, again, this tapestry allows us to toggle back and forth, toggle between the Norman conquest in 1066 and, by the way, the New Yorker cover from just after D-Day that presents D-Day as a reverse Norman conquest, right? When we visited the beaches, I think we can only say that it was stunning. We were stunned by what we saw, and there was no way to understand that event except as a miracle. No way to understand it. Bayeux, as I mentioned, passed relatively unscathed. But then we saw this, and there's a typo here, I'm sorry, that should be V-I-E-R, Vieilleville. We saw this remarkable sculpture. It was very hard for me when I got back to find out more about this sculpture, which I personally think is as powerful in its way as the famous image of the mounting of the flag on Iwo Jima. It has that thing of capturing this moment, and it's so intensely real in the way that things like the canteen is portrayed. Everything is so precise, and what is he doing? He's pulling his comrade along. It's like a sack of potatoes, and the guy is terrible. You can see from his mouth, you can see him screeching in pain, and his hands, in this very intense gesture. Phenomenally powerful image, and yet very difficult to find anything about the artist, whose name I found, and then when I tried to find out more about him, sort of disappeared. There's a new plaque since we were there that was put up on the 27th of September about this particular sculpture. So, time to go back. And then the visit to the American cemetery and to the British cemetery. I posted on our chat the image on the left, this pendant, and I wondered if any of you had such a thing in your household. I have my dad's one. You have it. It was issued to all Episcopalians who were fighting in the Second World War. And the odd thing is that my dad, at that point in his life, was still a Lutheran. And I recently found a letter that was sent by an Episcopal chaplain to my mother, saying that my father had come to see him before he was in the Navy, and he did troop transport escort, saying that this is too much information, but saying that my dad had come to see him, and that this chaplain knew that my dad was a Lutheran, but it was okay. It was very touching. So he must be the one who gave my dad that, since technically speaking, Daddy didn't qualify. We looked at this sculpture together, which is officially known as the Spirit of American Youth Rising from the Waves. The sculptor was a man called Donald Delu, who was born Donald Quigley. Delu was a family name on his mother's side, and in 1918, he changed his name from Donald Quigley to Donald Deluc. Clearly, he self-identified as French. And this is, when he went to study in France, he became Donald Deluc. He is responsible for this. And remember we talked about it, I said, oh my gosh, it's just like a Baroque ivory of Jesus on the cross. And our English guide was like, I don't know, lady, you're kind of crazy. But then when we went to Notre Dame later on, I could show you these images, and I think I probably pulled up some on my screen in the meantime. And I subsequently found out that there is somewhere on the base an inscription that says, "Mine eyes have seen the glory." Now, I defy that man to tell me that he did not have images of Christ in his mind when this was made. He's also done a similar sculpture or similar composition for the New York World's Fair, a Boy Scout memorial, which is in something called President's Park in D.C. I don't know where that is, but maybe you guys do, and a couple of sculptures at Gettysburg. In 1951, he was interviewed for the New York Times and about the fact that his art was so traditional at a time when there were lots of much more avant-garde, abstract works of art being done. And he was asked about his choices, and he said, well, you know, abstract artists and we don't like each other. They think we're old hat, and we think they're incompetent. We had an extraordinary Mass service right there. I still don't understand how we had this privilege, but we did. And it was an event that's really beyond words. At Chartres, we walked to the Saône-et-Lumière one night, and I thought as I went, oh boy, this is going to be so kitsch. How am I going to, be like a good sport about this? I loved it. It was magical, right? And we saw the whole kind of history of France going across the face of the cathedral, and that was something to behold. Chartres is too much to take in. It's really too much to take in. If I were to ask for one lesson, one thing that I would hope that you took away from that visit, is that the cathedral was sustained by its people. And you see that in particular in all the windows that were sponsored by the various tradesmen, right? There's the butcher's window, there's the vintner's window. This detail is from the furrier's window. And this very, handsome furrier, right? They have themselves represented. They're proud of what they have done for their church or what they're doing to make Chartres an even more beautiful place. And he's holding this big thing that you might have guessed was a shield or something, but it's not. It's a particular kind of fur that was a sort of, before ermine, the fur of choice among the royalty and the nobility, which was called vair, V-A-I-R. You may remember that in the story of Cinderella, she wears glass slippers. The French word for glass is verre, V-E-R-R-E. When someone was translating the old French text, they saw the word V-A-I-R and decided, oh, that must be an old French spelling for glass, V-A-I-R instead of V-E-R-R-E, and so it was translated that she wears glass slippers. Guess what? She wore fur slippers. Right? I kind of like the glass slipper better, but historically, it's not accurate. We couldn't see this because you can't take in that glass from the floor, right? But I think it's so important. This representation of a bread maker. He's got a sweatband around his forehead. He has sleeveless outfit because it's hard work. It's a full body workout. This muscular guy is really putting it into kneading the bread. He's got a big table that he's working on. And if you look closely, if you were able to look closely, which you can't, but through the miracle of photography, do you see that there's the face appearing in the bread? Right? So it's the face of Christ, because this guy has a very important job. He makes the bread that is needed for the Eucharist. It's a magnificent image. Very sophisticated, right? Very sophisticated. We went into the treasury which was another stair kind of challenge. But the takeaway that I would want you to have from there is this remarkable Anglo-Saxon survival. It's an Anglo-Saxon ivory. Why does it survive? Because you can't melt down ivory. So Anglo-Saxon goldsmith work was off the charts beautiful and important, and William the Conqueror and all of his best friends took it and melted it down, but they couldn't really do much with the ivory. But this one they kept, and then it was somehow it came back to France. This was no doubt, this was in England, right? We will see, those of us who are missing in the exam, another crucifixion, ivory crucifixion similar to this in the Victoria and Albert Museum today. Okay, moving right along. We learned about Wellborn Barton Griffith, who, on the 15th of August, 1944, shouldered responsibility of saving cultural heritage himself. He was not a member of the Monuments Man. He's not in the George Clooney movie. But he called off the shelling of Chartres Cathedral because he couldn't bear to not double check, right? The thinking was that the Germans were using Chartres Tower to survey the landscape, and he went in a jeep on his own and checked the entire cathedral and was able then to phone back and say, no, they are not here. It's okay. We don't have to attack this cathedral. And then the subsequent day was himself killed. It's an incredible story. And that takes us to Paris, where the liberation of Paris happened on the Feast of Saint Louis. I was utterly convinced that that was done intentionally, that somehow that was like propaganda, we got to make it be on the Feast of Saint Louis. No, it wasn't. It just turned out that way, which is quite extraordinary. And the sense of how Paris was saved at that moment, I think, became more intense for all of us, right? When we thought about it against the backdrop of what had taken all of our breaths away, April 15th, whatever year that was, when Notre Dame in Paris had nearly was destroyed. When I pulled this image up on my computer, you know, AI gives me an informative little label of what it sees, and it said, a fire in a building. A fire in a building? Really? You know, it's so, how can you even think that way? But this was for us, right, what we, even at a remote distance, what we experienced was a medieval event. It really was a medieval event. It happened all the time in the Middle Ages, right? I was asked at the Met to speak the day after the fire in the sculpture hall at the Met, and I read part of the account without saying what it came from. Part of the account of the fire in Canterbury Cathedral at 1174, in 1174. And it was so similar. It was so similar to what we had seen. And, you know, this is what the people who were, you know, those official watchers of St. Paul's in London during the Second World War, what they were trying to, and ultimately successfully did prevent during the war. And so there we were to go into Notre Dame after the miraculous restoration with two illustrious members of our group. And what an experience it was to go inside and see this beautiful light, right? This soaring joy of this building, another Dennis photograph, as you might guess, and just the lush foliage of those capitals, all the different leaves, right? It gives an overall effect that's homogeneous, and yet it's not, right? There's variation everywhere you look. And how profound when you think about this, and she who, she survived the fire, all of that ash around her, and now with lilies beneath. And another view of just how gorgeous this place is and always was. But in new glory with the light, right? This with the wonderful Matisse tapestry, which complements, I think, beautifully the Vieux-le-Duc baptistry. And then to see this, I don't know if you will remember, but before we went, I had showed this. I showed an image of Melania Trump and Mrs. Macron walking past it, not even looking up at it, and it just killed me. And now it's absolutely beautiful and clean, and we had this fantastic sermon from your rector about the visitation while we were there, and how profound the visitation is. And notice that this ensemble, this does not begin with the Annunciation. This series begins with the visitation. It's kind of extraordinary, beautiful. And then the sort of befuddled Magi by contrast, and the slightly out of work Joseph on the side, and the power of those women at the beginning of that discussion. The rooster who took off and was found a couple of days later, and then our visit to the Musée de Cluny, where we could see sculptured heads of kings that had been cut down from the facade of Notre Dame during the French Revolution, because, why would you want to not knock off the head of every king, real or sculpted? We talked about, roles of women in the visitation, but there was also this image that one could pass by, and these women are clearly wondering just where Caroline found those jackets. On to Reims, and first to Saint-Remy, which we talked about the damage to it during the First World War. And then we looked at an amazing object which is so captivating in person and which so does not work in an image like this. And it is a reminder to us all that works of art are meant to be seen in the flesh, or whatever, we shouldn't say in the flesh, but you know what I mean. You have to see the real thing when you can, when it hasn't been, say, destroyed in the French Revolution, as this 9th century great masterpiece was. Some of you are aware of a colleague of mine, a historian, who doesn't think that the French Revolution was such a big deal, because she said to me, "Oh, well, the terror only lasted a year." Then we talked about Reims and the bombing of Reims in 1914, and how that galvanized the French and the British and the Americans to really take the war in a very serious way that encompassed the issue of cultural monuments. And that's really the beginning of American philanthropy, American support for cultural monuments in France, with John D. Rockefeller's gift to the rebuilding of Reims, which he made in 1924. They didn't finish the restoration until July of 1938. On the inside of Reims, I think it was very meaningful for all of us to see this image. Is it biblical? Is it crusader? Is it for us as pilgrims, this collapse of history, of the things that we share across the centuries with fellow Christians? And again, the collapse of history, back to the notion of traders' windows, right? The tradesmen's windows. And at Reims, that the glass had been replaced at the expense of the champagne growers of the city. And that was something that we had to take very seriously. And so we visited those caves, which have been, of course, exploited since Roman times, only more recently for the purpose for which they were destined, right, for the Champagne caves. And the timelessness of the kind of enjoyment that our trip was about. I mentioned to you along the way that early on that we should bear in mind the image of angels blowing horns. And I am quite sure that there were more than a few angels celebrating with us each step along the way. It's time to go to church. I thank you for your attention.
No conversation about a past pilgrimage should end without an infomercial for the next one. So this comes from Dean Ian Markham, specifically designed for you.
Not quite time to go to church.
I would like you to consider coming on a pilgrimage to England with Dr. Barbara Bowe, Ian Markham, Barney Hawkins and Oral Order. Now, of course, you've all been there. You've done the Campus Rose thing. You've discovered hotel rooms are small, and the showers don't work, and that the country's expensive. So I get all that. And it's also true that some things that we're going to do, you've perhaps already done. You've perhaps already done the candlelit walk to the shrine of St. Thomas of Becket, and perhaps you've already done the opportunity to see the original Christopher Wren model that King Charles I walked through at St. Paul's. But thanks to a variety of collections like childhood friends and college friends and colleagues at the University of Exeter and elsewhere, we've opened up opportunities that you almost certainly have not done before. So let me give you a couple of pieces. First, you'll have lunch in the Jerusalem Chamber at Westminster Abbey. Now, the Jerusalem Chamber is where the King James Version of the Bible was originally read by the translators, and where King Henry II died in front of the fireplace. You will hang out with the Professor of Musicology at the University of Cambridge, who happened to be a friend of mine from Exeter, and we will dine at King's College, Cambridge, inside the college. You will go to Little Gidding, and you will handle vessels which are literally centuries old. You will go to Durham, and you will enjoy the hospitality of St. John's College, Durham. In other words, we make this a behind-the-scenes tour, where you discover places that you'll never see again. So please come. It'd be great to be with you. Brendan.
Also Durham?
Yeah. There's a little QR code that tells you all the information you need to know about. Again, let's thank Barbara.